Hi everyone, this is the November 28th meeting of Gateway API. As always, this is a Kubernetes meeting, so usual code of conduct stuff applies. Please be excellent to each other. Okay, Philip, I think you are up.
Yeah, sorry about this whole airplane thing. It was poorly timed. So, I work at F5, and we have a product already in this space, and we want to start using sort of more normal APIs, right? We don't want to just use F5 specific CRDs for what we're doing. And we're kind of focused on, at the moment, on a lot of communication service provider problems. So like launching 5G and having cloud native network functions. So not sort of normal apps, but where the application is networking. And there are a couple of sort of key things that we are really interested in working on. One of the biggest is egress, and not just sort of HTTP egress, but for our customers, sort of the whole stack matters. And so the question is, I know there isn't any work currently in egress. I think there's been discussion of maybe doing it. How should we get started? Like, should we be trying to figure out if there are other people interested before starting to make submissions, start making submissions? How do we get active in something that maybe isn't one of the current active areas?
I think that's a great question. So I would definitely say there's definitely interest in egress. I think everybody knows that it's a problem that we have to solve at some point. Up till now, it's been like sort of further down the priority list for most of the people working on it. So in terms of getting started, yeah, I mean, there's no reason why you can't just get started. Like, start thinking about egress, start thinking about how you want to describe it. Start writing some docs or something like that on like what you want about what you want the Gateway API to do for you, right? Like, what do you want egress description to look like? What do you want it to do? Like, and start with some use cases. Start writing down, that sort of stuff. And that's how we start this conversation off generally. And that goes for anybody who wants to add more features in general. That's the best way to get started. Is to usually the best thing to do is just start a Google Doc, talk about it in here, post about it in the Slack, and then we can all sort of start talking about it on there. I think, yeah, that's probably enough for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you said post it in. I think I didn't quite hear what you said. Start with a Google Doc, post it in, and then something, and then talk about it in Slack.
Yeah. So just so, I mean, the headline is start a Google Doc. Start writing down the sorts of things that you're thinking about, the sorts of use cases you want to cover, like in reasonably specific kind of ways, like, we need TCP, we need UDP, we need it to do this, and that sort of stuff. And then other people can start adding their own use cases, and that's how we end up with like a sort of more reasonable, set of things to do. What we found in the past is, without spending some time sort of dialing into use cases and the language that we're all going to talk about this thing, Costin, you're unmuted. That you can end up sort of talking around in circles a lot, because although generally we all think about things in roughly the same way, the fine detail can be very different, and that can have huge impacts on how you talk about and design the stuff that the API that you got to use to represent it. And so spending some time talking about use cases and what everyone's trying to achieve is almost always time well spent.
Question, are you interested in egress gateway use cases or just regular egress from application to the internet?
That's a good question.
So sort of both. It depends on the protocol you're talking about.
Yeah. So
I mean, one of the biggest things that we're seeing, for example, in service provider, when people are launching network functions, is you just need to be able to identify traffic as having come from a particular network function, because some of them will get access to your radio access network, some will get access to the internet, some will get access to other things. And the way they set up their firewalls is all layer 4. So you need to do SNAT based on the specific network function, based on the specific app. And so, even just something as simple as that. And then at higher level protocols, sometimes egress and ingress have to be tightly coupled because you have a peering relationship. So.
Yeah, as someone who worked on a Envoy-based ingress controller for a long time, one of our most common use cases was people saying, "Oh, Contour." This is when I was working on Contour. People would be like, "Oh, Contour is great, but I'd really like it to do UDP ingress as well." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, we can't do that. Like, you can send a UDP stream to Envoy, and Envoy can forward it onto your pods, but like, you got two options then. Either your pods get Envoy as the source of the UDP, or they don't, and traffic doesn't go back to Envoy, and so it goes straight back out the default gateway and will probably get dropped because it'll more than likely be RFC 1918 space or something like that." So, like, I know what you mean, that like sometimes the ingress and the egress might need to be coupled, and you might need to do stuff, especially with UDP to fix it. And I can see how for network functions that would be even more the case. So yeah, like that's exactly what I mean by let's talk about use cases, and the place to start is to start talking about the sorts of things you want to do, and then people can say, "Oh, have you considered doing it this way or that way?" And we can talk about like what's the best ways to do these, and if we have tools already that we can use to sort of accomplish those use cases. And if not, then what are we going to build, right? Like, so we've got to sort of understand what we have, what we're missing before we can figure out what we need to build. Does that make sense?
Excellent. I have one more question. And what is there sort of a pre-existing vision on how someone might layer in like security policies? Like if you wanted to add a firewall or an application firewall or whatever else into the gateway API.
So right now, a lot of that stuff we've intended to sort of leave it to meta resources like policy attachment, just because it's very difficult for a lot of those things. It's very difficult to write them in a standardized way that works across lots of implementations. I mean, that's the core problem. The core design goal and problem of Gateway API is that it's about making something that's implementable across lots of implementations for whatever you're talking about. And so for something like HTTP ingress, that's reasonably straightforward, right? Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do that everybody can do. And there's some stuff that only some people can do. That's extended. And then there's but when you start doing like more advanced use cases, so for the layer 7 stuff like rate limiting, auth, that sort of stuff there, then the capabilities that different implementations can provide become very different. I think for firewalling, it's a lot more standard. And so it should be possible to sort of talk about what we're trying to do. But the other thing that we've got to keep in mind then is that the concepts need to like make sense. Like, one of the things that we worked really hard on was, I see your question, I'll get to you in a sec, was on like defining a gateway to be like, it's basically the point at which you go from not knowing about the cluster internals to knowing about the cluster internals. From external to internal but external and internal are not always good ways to describe that. And so when we're talking about like firewalls and stuff like that, like a lot of what we talked about so far is load balancing, which kind of shares a lot with firewalls, but we got to be careful as well, because there's also network policy and a bunch of stuff that the CNIs do and things like that where they also talk about firewalls. And so we've got to be really careful about that we don't overlap too much with what other people are doing, or we use existing mechanisms, or that sort of stuff. And so the more we overlap with stuff that has existing mechanisms, the more we need to allow for that sort of overlap. Costin.
Yeah, pretty much what you said. I just want to kind of clarify a bit that different vendors may do different things for authentication. We are also trying to have some common ground, some common policies. I mean, at least for what we can do common, and also some common patterns. For example, if we all use certificates for workload identity, maybe agree on the format for the certificates and how to distribute routes and other stuff. So, and there are two main trends, I think. One is network policy, where, again, there are all kind of existing APIs that are in broad using Kubernetes and maybe mappable to egress. And then there is a certificate-based approach that, again, it's also pretty common. And obviously, if you want to define something new, we're all interested to hear about it. But it will be great in the docs that hopefully you will start if we can, kind of figure out which of those options you are interested in, and maybe we can collaborate on it.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so hopefully that does that sort of answer a few of your questions. I mean, look, I've got to be clear. There's no Gateway API is still in an early enough stage. There's no hard, solidified process aside from the fact that big changes need to get. That's the one bit of process that we have, really, is big changes need to get, and then whatever we make has to pass Kubernetes API review. Sorry, 2 bits of process. But aside from that, it's kind of pretty flexible. What we found is that having a Google Doc or something like that is a great way to get some async discussion happening outside of these meetings. And then once you've done that a bit, it's good to bring that to the meeting and then do some high bandwidth backwards and forwards. And then usually that, 1 or 2 rounds of that is enough to then make something that we can turn into a proposal or a GEP or something like that then we can thrash out the fine detail of, and then have something that's actually implementable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and then it seems like the document also helps focus on finding the people who are interested in that, sort of, areas, right? Yeah,
look, we've already got, in terms of special ed, we've basically got, a SIG already for Gamma, that's let's focus on the, using Gateway API style objects for mesh constructs. I see no reason why you couldn't do the same sort of thing for let's focus this on egress, or or more specifically on sort of network functions and even lower layer stuff. I mean, I'll be real, the layer 4 stuff right now that's in the API is very basic because not a lot of people have spent enough time on it. I mean, I'm working at ISO now on Cilium, and it's definitely on my list of things to do because it's a thing that Cilium can do as well. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to help contribute there. And I think a lot of other people will be too.
Outstanding. I'll stop hogging the time. Thanks.
No worries. Thank you. That's a great question, and awesome that you raise it. Yeah. Well, that said, if you don't have anything else to ask there, then what else would anyone like to talk about? Candice, it looks like you have a conformance test question.
Yes, I joined late.
You're really quiet again. No, still.
I think you were muted.
It looks like you might be hardware muted or something, because you're Zoom unmuted, but still no. Sorry.
Based on
okay.
the question in the document, I think she was asking if people have run the conformance test and have it pass.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know Contour definitely has, Cilium definitely has, because I've been involved in both of those. I think I'm pretty sure, Costin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that Istio has the conformance tests running already. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say that GKE is running them and almost passes. So almost.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess my question would be okay, yeah, cool. So Mike says console has been running them as well. There's a handful skipped that don't pass yet. is I guess Candice, maybe if you just want to if you can't get the audio working, that's cool. But if you want to just put in the chat, maybe are you talking about like how to actually like run the like command wise the conformance test? Because I know we don't have a great how to or anything like that at the moment, or you know, how to run it for your implementation, or yeah, sort of the, because yeah, I think you can run it but it doesn't pass. Okay. It's not passing because I mean there are a bunch of assumptions that probably are poorly explained. It's kind of the conformance tests look for expect that there's a gateway class installed that will expect that there's a gateway class installed that can handle having multiple gateways.
Test.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So yeah, I can run the conformance tests. I'm trying to get conformance tests for pass through right now, and with the first implementation that I selected, it's not running. So I am going to try. I guess I'm going to try a different implementation and see. So it is running, but it's not passing. So I'm going to try a different one to find out.
Okay, so you're testing the TLS route. You're trying to
yes, and pass through specifically. Yep.
Yeah. I think so. I think Contours ones should do that. I don't know if the guys have updated since we updated the conformance tests. I think the support was there. Yeah, I think so I definitely think that if you could log an issue with like some of the stuff you've done and like, you know, how it's not working and that sort of stuff, I think that there's absolutely a lot of space for us to make some pretty good improvements to the like to the how to run the conformance test, or to have a how to run the conformance test document, which we currently don't.
Yeah, I'm trying to put that together as I
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Okay. It's been a little while since I ran it myself. I'll be honest. Yeah. Maybe one of the others who have been running it might be able to, like, maybe you could tee up a time to pair with someone or something like that to sort of walk through how they do it and how you do it, and
I think it would help probably just throw this to Slack. That might be, and they just get live debugging.
Yeah, I think that feels like the right thing here is let's try and get you paired up with someone, and that way you can that seems like the fastest way to get your help here.
Okay.
There's no point in helping you because it'll take me longer to figure out how to do everything because I haven't done it in ages.
We don't have a table of people whose conformance tests have passed. I mean, whose implementation has passed the conformance tests or anything like that, right?
So
no.
Rob, I think, is working on a way to submit documentation for it. I think there's an issue to track this.
Yeah, but there's no table or anything like that at the moment. Rob has been looking at like how Upstream does it for Kubernetes conformance, and so we're trying to like make something more more so that there will be a reference somewhere. But yeah, I'm pretty confident that that there are quite a few, at least those 4 that we've mentioned, that the conformance tests do work. And so yeah, Mike said in the chat that he's happy to jump in a Slack thread or pair with you later in the week.
Yep. Thank you, Mike.
So yeah, thanks. This is actually a really good question. Let me make a note here. That I will check into that way you can have an issue to put updates in. I think there was Istio as well. I suspect that Kong maybe as well, Candice, but thanks for the question. No, great question. Sorry.
I'm actually using Istio, so
Okay, cool.
it's not, it's a little bit behind some of the changes in the conformance tests.
Yeah, okay, cool. So okay, no worries. So I think it makes sense for you to have a chat to someone else then and see if you can get that working, or maybe Mike can help you do consoles ones or something like that, just so you can see them work.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for that question, Candice. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about?
We could do triage, or we could continue. I don't know if we had a follow-up on the SSL or TLS to backends discussion, whether or not what the state of that is.
The state of that is waiting on me.
I see.
It's waiting on me. I think where I'm at the moment with that is that I think that that the sort of backend capabilities, backend properties object was too big in scope and had too much sort of bleed into other use cases. And so what I'm thinking is that we should consider doing a more tightly focused sort of backend property style meta resource that that just literally just handles backend properties re-encryption to a backend, and just making it just focused on that, so that then it's very clear about what the use case is. Because I think part of the problem we had was like people were like, oh, but what happens when you use this backend capabilities for something other than what you're talking about there, which I hadn't thought about at the time. So I think that's probably where it is. That means that for me, for the action there is for me to go back and sort of put some of that into the original GEP and sort of update the original GEP. I'm happy to hand that off to someone else if anyone wants it, but that's where it is at the moment.
Okay, I just want to remind people, because I just looked at the notes, is that we do have, I think all the discussion is focused on the TLS API TLS Gateway API TLS use cases doc.
Yeah,
just pop that up there.
Yeah, thanks.
Just to make sure that folks have access to that.
So let me just make a note about Philip, your previous question. Do you want to Philip, do you want to hit your next question while I type up some notes about the previous discussion?
Yeah, I mean, this may just be an ignorant question because I am still trying to understand like how exactly TLS route works, because it's kind of not the way I think of the problem, I think. But the term pass-through, is there going to be a general concept of pass-through in Gateway API, or is that a specific way of laying out TLS?
It's in this case. Sorry, you go. No, you go. Finish asking your question.
Well, I was just gonna. I'm probably again utterly confused, but to me, like, anytime you're lower in the OSI stack, it could sort of be passing through to a higher layer of, rules and routes, right? Am I thinking about that entirely the wrong way?
So when we're talking about pass-through, we're meaning passing through the gateway. So like passing through the gateway without being sort of unwrapped. That's what we're meaning when we're talking TLS pass-through, is that you're not terminating the TLS and then re-encrypting it, and you're not going to clear text.
So I think this one is
terminating TLS.
Yeah, I don't know if at least this is how I interpret it. I don't know if it's like immediately generalizable like across all protocols, because you could imagine, okay, you're like doing some kind of wrapping or unwrapping, but basically as an important use case, there are lots of things that will route TLS based on the SNI, but not necessarily manipulate and terminate the TLS. So that's what we mean by a pass-through TLS. It's just like a term of art that people kind of have settled on to describe this sort of routing.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I get it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So,
So-
but it doesn't necessarily then attach to like a higher layer route, and that's why HTTP route has separate TLS information in it.
Yes.
It's because you don't connect a TLS route and an HTTP route.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically the idea here is that the different routes route based on sort of more or less information. So again, I think this needs to be we need to bring this closer to the top of the documentation, but like the idea behind the different routes is TCP route and UDP route, traffic arrives at a gateway listener and you can pick out where that traffic goes to based only on the stuff that's in the route. And so TCP route and UDP route allow you to route on source address, destination address, and conceivably source port. I mean, destination port is included in the listener definition. Those ones, that's it. That's all you have available to route on. You can't route on. I mean, conceivably, we could allow routing on stuff that doesn't require you to terminate the connection. Maybe, conceivably you could use like diffserv bits or, other bits in the TCP or UDP and the IP headers. But like you can't use, it's the point here is it sort of puts a ceiling on how far up the stack you can look in terms of that routing. TLS route lets you look into the TLS negotiation and the SNI and use, as Bowie said, use the SNI to route things. So the usual use case there is that you've got one gateway listening on 443, and you've got like one to many services that all have different SNIs, and you can route those to different pods in the backends based only on the SNI. But because it's a TLS route, what the implicit assumption is that you're not unwrapping the traffic. You can't inspect inside the traffic any more than the SNI. And then HTTP route is sort of, again, the ceiling is higher in that it's expected that the gateway can inspect the HTTP traffic somehow. Usually that means, obviously, if it's encrypted, you can't, right? Like you have to unwrap the traffic. You can't have it encrypted and be able to see the headers or the path or anything like that. And so that's where we talk about re-encrypt for HTTP route, because if you've terminated it, sometimes you want to re-encrypt it as it leaves the load balancer or the gateway, right? Like, and so that's sort of how the different route structures work. And then gRPC route is effectively syntactic sugar on top of a HTTP route that lets you talk about things in the way that gRPC folk are used to talking about them, rather than having to turn them into path calls and stuff like turn method calls into path calls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. You're doing an actual route based on TLS. You're just not terminating it. I get it. I get it.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, Costin.
Two quick points on this. One, it may go away soon because new versions of TLS are kind of deprecating the SNI and encrypting the SNI. So for client communication, it may no longer be that effective as it is now. And second, there are other things that can be used. I mean, in Istio, for example, we're using some MTLS over H2. So there are all kind of standards in RFC to kind of encapsulate opaque traffic, provide end-to-end security, which is the primary goal of this, but with better ways to convey metadata. So it's another interesting discussion to have at some point about this.
Yeah. So I think, and again, the one of the reasons that we designed the API the way we have is that it is absolutely intended that we can add further routes to do different types of routing based on using some other metadata as routing discriminators. That's the as Bo said, the term of art I like to use is that the different routes, the thing that tells the different routes apart are what routing discriminator you can use to pick where things go. Like I mean, I've said before that I could conceivably see that we would have to change the listener definition a little bit to handle the all ports use case to do it. But conceivably, you could also have an IP route, right, that described a gateway that is effectively a router. And an IP route would be an entry in the route table. Like that, there's no, like, conceptually that is possible. Right now, it's not possible because of the way that we've structured things, because we've heavily lent into higher layer stuff, not layer 3. But conceptually, we could do that. Does that make sense? Philip? I think it's a great question too. Thanks.
Yes, I was actually just typing that I have yet another question, but again, I don't want to thing.
Yeah, let's give everyone else a
That makes
chance. And if not, then it's better that we're talking than just sitting around not talking. So does anyone else have anything they would like to ask? Anything at all? Remember, this is like an open agenda meeting. Like we're not. So Bowie, the reason I didn't want to do triage was I kind of wanted to give everyone a discussion chance rather than.
It's good. It's the post US holiday. Everyone just
exactly.
kind of chill out.
Yeah.
I have like a really high level question about the cross namespace secrets for gateways. So I work on a cert manager and we have like an integration for like automatically generating cert manager certificates for gateways, and that doesn't really work cross namespace. So I'm curious about whether you think it will be like widely used secrets in different namespaces, or it's just for like very specific use cases.
I think it is for very specific use cases, but like I don't like I've used Search Manager, it's awesome, and nice work, and I think that it's definitely, it seems possible to me that you could make it work. It would be, there's a couple of extra hoops that you would need to jump through to make it work. The idea here is that is actually sort of for people who want to do, like for people who don't want the secret to live next to the gateway, right? Like that's, and so I agree that in most of the time for Cert Manager, you want the secret to live next to the thing that you're automatically generating it for. But the sort of use cases that I have seen people want that specific functionality for have been somewhere where it's either not automatically generated or it's there are some significant sort of barriers to generating more ones. Like people are actually buying certs, like before Let's Encrypt was a real thing. That was a real problem, right? Like you have the cert for Bowie has a cert for google.com, for www.google.com. He doesn't want to like put that where just anybody can read it, right? Like the key more importantly, and so like that's the sort of use case where you've got some big shared cert or a wildcard cert more usually that you want to sort of keep away from everyone sort of prying fingers. But yeah, like I don't like, I think you could do it, but I agree that it seems weird to need to do it for Cert Manager.
I guess the question, actually, I'm very curious, like what about it doesn't work?
Well, like right now, I think we weren't even aware that it was possible to specify a namespace. So right now, if you were to use our gateway feature to just create a certificate in the exact same namespace where the gateway is, the reason why it may not be possible, I think, is probably because we add like an owner reference to that certificate of the gateway. So, and the certificate would need to be in the same namespace as the secret. So probably that wouldn't work.
Oh, interesting.
Namespace.
I see. It's like cross namespace garbage collection, basically.
Yeah. Plus, I guess we would need to use. I've not really looked at this in depth. I guess we would also need to use your reference grant mechanism to actually figure out that this user can create these certificates. But yeah, I guess I'm curious whether it's something that people would be wanting. And it sounds like from what Nick said that it's likely not Cert Manager use cases where this would be needed. So we might just like add a check and like not explicitly not allow this rather than try to implement it.
Although I have to say, like, multiple areas in Kubernetes are looking at sort of cross namespace resources. So the fact that the owner reference does not allow this behavior is an interesting one. Like we may see like, hey, do we want to add a namespace field into owner reference itself?
It seems pretty dicey because then the garbage collection becomes much harder for like namespaces and stuff like that. I can see the scared expression on Tim's face when I think about telling him about doing that. But I think to me, it certainly makes sense that for now, it would make sense for Cert Manager to just say, yeah, we don't do this. If you want it, come talk to us, right? Like that would be what I would do if I was you. I would say, hey, yeah, we're not supporting this at the moment. If you really need it, then we'd love to talk to you, and we'd like to understand more about how you need it, and see if anyone comes to talk to you.
Awesome. Thanks for your opinion.
So just to actually had a question regarding that. Cert Manager does provide a gRPC interface, not widely used, but can that be leveraged to keep things in memory and just communicate, any way you need to?
I don't think we have a gRPC interface.
Okay.
Sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but yeah, you interact with Cert Manager just by creating Kubernetes resources.
Okay. So that's an extension that. Okay.
If you ask enough, maybe you'll come into existence.
Okay. Yeah, we were just doing some work around it, and I thought my team was leveraging something that already existed and extending that, but maybe they just built the whole thing from scratch. I'll take a look.
Cool. So yeah, I think Candace, I saw your question. We'll jump to that in a sec. But yeah, I just want to round out this sort of cert manager / search discussion. Providing certs not through secrets certainly does have value. That's why people have built the CSI, the secrets plugin interface, and that's basically kind of does that. It's a bit weird because you can't use it with Gateway because there's no pod to sort of mount a CSI plugin secret into. But I think that sort of pattern of, I mean, I could see sort of extensions that you could try with the Gateway API to say, hey, reach out, grab this secret from, I don't know, Vault or something, or GKE's certificate storage, or AWS's certificate storage, or AKS's, like anybody's, like some external certificate store or something like that would be pretty useful as well. So yeah, I think definitely that I can conceivably see that we would do that, but has anyone spent any time thinking about that? No. Sorry, I don't think we've actually spoken before, but person from Cert Manager, would you mind just putting a couple of notes in the agenda about it? Because otherwise I'm going to forget the details.
Yeah, I will do that. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And thanks for the great question too. Yeah, sorry to not have met you before.
No, thanks for the answer.
No problem. Yeah, I think that there's definitely some discussion to be had though about sort of dynamic certificate provisioning and how that crosses over with keeping certs in different namespaces from things and using cross namespace references. Bowie alluded to it before, and we've discussed it a couple of times that we have reference grant right now to handle sort of cross namespace references of all types, secrets included, and that we are speaking to API machinery and other groups because reference grant seems useful enough that that there is a case to be made that maybe it should be in a more general place in core or in some other place that is consumable that's not just part of the Gateway API. But yeah, so watch that space for those of you who haven't heard that before. Candice, you have a couple of questions about session persistence and X-forwarded for.
Yes, just those two things. We're looking to just find out whether there's any prior art or any if there's been any discussion about it in the past. That I have to admit that I haven't looked through the issues or discussion sections yet of the repo. Just a general idea of whether this is important to anybody that's been to the meetings, and whether there's any work being done on it, on either of those.
So I mean, I have some answers, but Bo, you go first.
I guess, could you clarify, are you looking for what is the behavior, or are you looking for configuration knobs?
Looking for is there standard way you're telling people to implement it for Gateway API? How people should implement it?
So the answer there is We have not done any work on this. We have not done any work on this yet, but there are definitely people interested kind of bucket as well. Again, Contour does have session persistence, and I mean it uses Envoy. Envoy has pretty magic support for exported for. Basically with most Envoy things, if you kind of don't need to mess with it too much, and it will usually just work. There's a couple of settings you got to set for Envoy, but then it just the exported for will be set pretty much correctly. So I think on Contour we fiddled around for a while and found the settings that worked for us, and then never touched them again because we were like, don't mess with this. But yeah, but for session persistence, we do have the Contour. Sorry, I say we, but I don't work on Contour anymore. But yeah, so Contour does have a bunch of stuff there. So there is some prior art in Contour's HTTP proxy. But again, this sort of, like I said, this falls into the bracket of, yeah, most people are going to want it, but we haven't worked on it enough yet to sort of, you know, sit down and write down use cases and talk about and figure out the language and do the whole thing again. You know, it's the case for sort of most of the things that are not in the API yet. If you can think of doing it with HTTP, I guarantee you we've talked about it. You know, but like most of the stuff has been very much in the, we need to get the basic HTTP routing and conformance and stuff sorted out first, and then we can look at how we add the other stuff later. I mean, it is later now, so it's 100% valid to be asking these questions. You know, but yeah, it's most of these are just, we haven't talked about them yet. And you know, same thing as Philip. Like, yeah, let's, you know, make some docs, get it started. I know I have led you down the wrong path there before with the backend capabilities, but I think that more tightly scoped things should be a lot easier to do. Like, you know, session persistence is pretty tightly scoped. People understand it pretty well. I don't think it will be too hard to get some pretty broad agreement on what that means and what sort of mechanisms you need to use. There is a bunch of stuff that you need to be able to do, you know, like, you know, just off the top of my head, you know, like if you start doing cookies, you got to be able to add like same site equals secure and a bunch of other attributes to cookies and things like that to make the session persistence work in the way people expect. But like those are all solvable problems.
Yeah, so I would say that if you're looking for more fine-grained configuration of these things, there's basically a couple of answers. One is it standardized in some way that we would expect really broad adoption? So then that makes sense to take into upstream. The other one is, if it's not, then the API is designed in a way that you can very easily create your custom extension and just kind of be able to do what you need to do. So that would be good question, I think, to just sketch out an answer to. If you feel like it makes sense as like a standard, then let's start talking about, okay, how this would be standardized across all the different implementations. But if your mainly your use case is like, I want it to work and I'm just going to create a policy around it, there's not, like, the API should be extensible to do that for you. Like, you should be able to do it very easily. And then the next question would be, okay, if you can't do that, let's talk, because that needs to definitely be part of the standard.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's more the standard way of doing it rather than trying to figure out a way to do it. Just, you know, to make sure that everyone's following the same way of doing it in the end would make it much more valuable, I feel like. So yeah, I'll keep an eye on it, and if you probably see something from us regarding that in the future.
Yeah, awesome. And that one I would say, yeah, like, don't be shy, like make the doc out, like get the doc out as a Google Doc as early as possible, and so that we can, yeah, not spend, yeah, like get the conversation happening. Micaiah?
Hi, I wanted to say, in my opinion, the more important thing is to know whether or how these things are implemented. So I think we're coming at this often from the implementer's perspective and not so much the admin's or operator's perspective. But if I'm someone using Gateway API, it's really important for me to know I have an HTTP route on this implementation. How will it behave on that implementation? Can I depend on session affinity, or can I depend on exported for to be set? I don't want to code to this implementation and then have my assumptions invalidated when I go to that implementation. So from my perspective, if I put on my user hat, what I really want is that it be documented. So is there some agreement that this is something where implementations need to document how or whether they implement session affinity and exported for?
Yeah, so yeah, I agree that that should absolutely be part of it. And the way that we like document that is the conformance tests. Like we have conformance tests that, set exported for to something, and then you sort of have the conformance tests assert that what it should be on the other side. And then there should be, if there's no way to configure it, it should behave in a standard way, or if there is a way to configure it, it should behave in a standard way without the config, and then with the config, you can change the config, and you know what I mean? Like that's what the way that we would define that is with the conformance tests. And I 100% agree with you that stuff like session persistence and exported for should be in the conformance tests. 1000% agree. It's just not done yet. Yet being the operative word.
Okay, that goes a few steps beyond what I was saying, but if you believe it's something that it makes sense to codify as implementations must implement it this way, then I suppose that would be fine.
Yeah, so like I think the way that we start there is to start a discussion of like, what can your implementation do? I mean, I think I would be pretty shocked if there were like, if any of the HTTP route implementations can't do some level of basic exported for sort of handling. Exactly how they get that to work is up to them, but like some like the most basic level, you should be able to retrieve the client address from the thing, and so the client address should be visible at the pod that it gets routed to, right? Like that's not a high level functionality. And the same for like session persistence, right? Like you should be able to say, stuff about when you do this, the request should all end up at the same pod. And we have conformance tooling that like lets the part of the conformance test that makes the request check which pod it's going to, or if we don't, that is definitely a thing that we can and should build. And so I think in my mind, those feel like capabilities that we should document with conformance tests like that. If not everybody can do them, then they can be extended conformance tests. That is sort of the definition of extended, is if not everybody can do them, but you can turn them on, then that's what extended conformance tests are for. I would hope that those should be core functions pretty much for HTTP route implementations, but maybe I'm wrong.
I am curious how different exported for handling would be. It seems, even though it's an X header, it seems to be fairly standardized. So if someone wants to open an issue and try to understand what are the differences, I'm just assuming it just works.
I mean, I suspect that the best way there is to just write a conformance test, put it in extended, and see who, and make it a feature that you can turn on and see whose implementation passes. Will probably be the easiest way to figure that out. But the and then if everybody does, then we just promote that conformance test to be part of the core, and it's not optional. But yeah, so like for both of those, for those two separate issues, exported for and session persistence, issues are the place to start. Let's have issues that we say, hey, we want to do. We think that session persistence and exported for should be covered, should be standardized features that have portability between implementations. This issue is to cover doing that, and then we figure out how to. Can everybody support the stuff? Can we describe it? And if so, how do we do it? Again, great questions, because all of those things are definitely things that I agree we should be doing.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we've got 10 minutes left. 10 minutes where the floor is open. Anybody else have any questions?
More.
Okay, cool.
So, as you mentioned about the gateway being essentially from inside to outside, sort of what has knowledge of what's going on inside of Kubernetes and what doesn't. I'm wondering if there are plans around IP address assignment. So, you know, and maybe specifically supplanting service type load balancer address assignment. So, you know, like again, in my area, citing on an IP address is not something that's done automatically. It's, you know, you spend months or at least weeks assigning an IP address for a network function, and it needs to move around with that network function. Is there a plan to do anything around, you know, these exposure IPs, the virtual IPs, the external IPs?
Well, so I mean, we have some functionality there already with Gateway. That's what the addresses field in Gateway is for. In the spec addresses field in Gateway is to say, I want this gateway to have these addresses. It's a list, so you can have more than one, but also you can only have one. So that lets you explicitly ask for a particular address. The intent there, we also have it in the status. And the intent there is that that if you don't ask for a specific address, you can you can see what address you ended up with. So that's definitely intended to replace service of type load balancer. That's it. So that part of the gateway with in combination with TCP route and UDP route is definitely intended at sort of replacing service of type load balancer in the layer 4 general case. Do I think that those will go away anytime soon? No. Services GA, it's never going anywhere. I'm going to be stuck with it. But like the idea here is to make it so that there's a more usable, portable alternative to service type load balancer. In terms of more advanced sort of IP address allocation functionality, we haven't talked too much about that yet, but like we have mentioned it previously that, hey, maybe you might want to specify a pool or something like that. But we haven't sort of got too far down that road aside from, yes, that's a thing that people sometimes want.
I just have to ask, the ask is around the IP to a load balancer service, or are you actually looking at cluster IP and kind of the internal stuff?
Yeah, no, not internal. I'm talking all about exposing services and so, I mean, part of it is that, you know, again, at some point, if you're talking about egress, you know, the IP addresses that you present for ingress, right, for exposing a service, and the IPs that you present on egress, you know, you probably have to have some relationship into in order for that. I was just wondering if there were any specific plans beyond just sort of what's already in the gateway.
I mean, again, all of that comes under we kicked the egress problem down the road thing a couple times, and yeah, that's where I 100% agree with you. Like, it totally makes sense that you need to make sure that if you're doing any sort of NAT, that the addresses match up so that you don't end up falling foul of reverse path forwarding checks and stuff like that. That the flow makes sense for all the network devices along the way. But we haven't thought about it yet.
Okay, I have no more questions.
Cool. 5 minutes left. Does anyone else have anything? If not, we'll probably just call it early. But yeah, welcome. Everyone's welcome to ask more questions. Please do. Okay, I'll give it a countdown here.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay, cool. Good.
Okay, regarding this reference grant, so I asked the question last week and then I read up on it. So anyway, so like the to and from, all those things, is it up to the implementer to enforce these allow to and from references? There's no like a webhook or a web, validator that will enforce these things?
No. So right now, it is the responsibility of the implementation to implement the reference grant, and that's how you pass the conformance tests. That's one of the things that we're hopefully looking at achieving at some point in the middle to long distance, is that, you know, something that's not the implementation will be able to do some of these checks for you, but for now it is on the implementer and the implementation to be the ones that do the checks, and that pass the conformance test basically. Yeah, and as Bowie says, so Shane and some others have been looking at writing this tool Blixt that's is intended sort of as a reference implementation for like basic stuff like for layer 4 forwarding. And so the idea there is that can then be a reference implementation for how reference grant works, and we can move our reference grant tests to be doing Blixt tests so that we can have CI against those reference grant tests that they work with the reference implementation. And then as long as you work like the reference implementation, then you will be able to pass the reference grant tests. That's probably as good as we're going to be able to get for quite a while, because doing this sort of stuff in a webhook or something like that is going to be a bit complicated. It's conceivable we could make some of the code of it, like make some helpers available to help you, but we've done that a bit in the past, and I certainly think that that's a thing that we could do more of, is to have like standard methods and stuff like that will validate reference grants or that sort of thing, but that's all to be done.
I mean, I noticed a lot like during the implementation, what little bit that we have done is a lot of those references that are like enforced, like it's up to the implementer to kind of like make sure that, hey, the parent ref to a gateway, exists in both ways. And I think it's fine. It's just I kind of wonder where the line is between like whatever the webhook validator.
The webhook.
And then where the implementer takes over.
The webhook validator is good for contradictions that arise within a single resource. But once you start needing to deal with multiple resources, then that's kind of needs to be left up to the implementation, because the webhook can only look at each resource as it comes in. It can't go and look at other resources as a result of what it can't do a reconciliation. Okay. That's
it's not making like an API call to Kubernetes.
Yeah, exactly right. Like a webhook can only look at the object that it's given, right? Like it gets given the object when you try and apply it, and it can look at that object and be like, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. That's all.
Like boundary testing, validation, things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so most of the stuff that's in the webhook at the moment is stuff where the rules are just. The reason we need you to run the webhook is that sometimes the rules are more complicated than you can express in like a regex field or a regex pattern in a validator or something like that, or a number of items, or some other really simple things like that. The validation language that you have available for CRDs at the moment is pretty limited. There has been some talk about having a more structured evaluation language that will hopefully like obviate a lot of the reason we need the webhook right now. But I don't think that you'll ever end up with something like a webhook that will do sort of those like referential integrity kind of checks. That's kind of, you need much more than a single object. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
Cool. With that, we are out of time. So unless anyone has anything really urgent, I should give a quick update. I am working on the changelog for the RC1 release. I should have that out in the next couple of days, the changelog ready. And then once that's done, we should be able to push the buttons on the release, on the RC release pretty soon. And then we are aiming for the 060 release sometime in December, before the big holiday break. So that, we can get something up before the end of this calendar year. Okay, with that, I will call the meeting done. Thank you all for your time. Thanks for the awesome questions. If we have discussed a question that we haven't taken any good notes about, please feel free to drop some notes in the agenda yourself. I'll try and make a couple of notes myself for what I remember, but there's a good chance I'll forget things because I was talking. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you all next week. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.